The corridor of the Virkin barracks was quiet that night, save for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant thrum of the great ship's reactor. Zaylor walked slowly, his long fingers brushing the metal wall as he moved. He had walked this hall many times, but tonight his steps felt heavier, as if each one carried a question he could not answer. Zaylor was a soldier of the Virkin Alliance, a race proud of its discipline and tradition. For centuries, they had fought in the cold darkness of space, holding their borders against raiders and empires alike. To the Virkin war was a ritual as much as survival. Soldiers carried weapons, engineers carried tools. There was order, there was separation. It had always been so, but the humans had come. Strange, chaotic, loud humans. A species that spoke too much and too quickly, laughed in the face of fear, and carried emotions like banners for all to see. They had been accepted into the Alliance only recently, after proving themselves against the Keth raiders. Many Virkin still doubted them, called them reckless, called them fragile, called them unpredictable. Zaylor himself did not know what to believe. His assignment was simple: watch them, learn from them, and report. Yet the more he watched, the more questions he had, and none more so than about one particular human, Private John Mason. It was late when Zaylor reached the humans' quarters. He paused at the door, his large black eyes blinking in hesitation. Humans needed more rest than Virkin, so Mason would be asleep by now. Still, curiosity gnawed at Zaylor, stronger than politeness. Slowly, he pressed the door panel, and it slid open with a hiss. The room was dim, filled with the faint glow of a small lamp near the bed. Zaylor stepped inside, moving with the silence of a hunter. His gaze settled on the figure lying on the bunk. Mason was asleep, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, his face half buried in the pillow. His mouth was slightly open, a soft sound escaping with each breath, but what caught Zaylor's eyes was not the human's face, it was his hands. Even in sleep, Mason clutched something close to his chest, a long piece of metal, worn, scratched, but polished by touch, a wrench. Zaylor froze in the doorway, staring. The human held it not loosely, but tightly, as though it were a blade, as though it were a lifeline. The metal glinted faintly in the dim light, and Zaylor felt a strange chill. Why? Why would a warrior sleep with a tool? The Virkin did not do this. Weapons were sacred, extensions of the self, but tools were for workers, for engineers, for those far from the battlefield. No soldier would rest with such an object in his arms. Yet here was Mason, asleep with his tool, clutched like a lover. Zaylor stepped closer, curiosity overpowering doubt. He leaned slightly, studying the human's face. Mason looked peaceful, unguarded, but the way his arms locked around the wrench told another story. It was as though, even in dreams, he refused to let go. A dozen thoughts flickered through Zaylor's mind. Perhaps it was superstition. Perhaps humans believed tools carried luck or protection. Perhaps this was a ritual, a strange human custom. No one had explained, but there was something deeper here. Zaylor could feel it in the air, as though the wrench itself carried meaning, history, memory. The sight stirred something inside him he could not name. For the first time in many cycles, Zaylor felt unsettled. He whispered to himself in the Virkin tongue, his voice almost trembling. What warrior sleeps with a tool instead of a weapon? The silence of the room gave him no answer. Mason only shifted slightly in his sleep, pulling the wrench closer to his chest, as if guarding it from unseen hands. Zaylor lingered a moment longer, staring at the strange human. Then he turned and slipped quietly back into the hall, his mind racing. The image burned in his thoughts, refusing to fade. A weapon was meant to destroy, a tool was meant to build. But perhaps, Zaylor wondered, humans saw no difference at all, and that thought frightened him more than any enemy ever had. The next morning, the hum of the ship carried a strange kind of calm. Zaylor had barely slept. His thoughts had circled all night around the image of the human clutching that metal wrench, as if it were his lifeline. Even when Zaylor closed his eyes, he saw it again. The strange, stubborn grip. The way Mason's body curled around the tool like it was more precious than air. For a Virkan soldier, this made no sense. Weapons were sacred. Shields were sacred. Tools were tools. They belonged in storage, organized and catalogued, waiting for duty. To sleep with one was madness. To cling to one like a warrior clings to his blade was something Zaylor could not understand. So he decided he would ask. He found Mason in the mess hall. The human was easy to spot, sitting at the corner of a table, his tray piled with food. Humans ate more than Virkan, and always with a strange, reckless hunger. Mason had his usual grin, his brown hair a mess, his uniform slightly wrinkled as though he never cared for order. He laughed with another soldier, tapping his fork against the tray like a drummer marking time. Zaylor stood silently behind him for a long moment, unsure how to begin. Finally, he cleared his throat with a low, clicking sound, and Mason turned, smiling wide. "My favorite shadow. You've been following me again," the human teased, his voice warm and easy. Zaylor ignored the humor. He had learned quickly that humans filled silence with jokes, as if words were shields. Instead, he asked directly, his tone blunt and serious, "Why do you sleep with a tool?" The laughter at the table died. The other human soldier raised his brows, then quietly excused himself, leaving the two alone. Mason blinked, chewing slowly, before setting his fork down. For a moment, he just stared at Zaylor, as if weighing how to answer. Then, with a small smile, he reached into his bag and pulled it out. The wrench, the same worn metal piece Zaylor had seen clutched in sleep. Its handle was dented in places, its edges scratched, but it gleamed where Mason's hands had polished it over time. Mason turned it over once, as though reminding himself of something, then set it carefully on the table. "This thing," Mason said softly, "this isn't just a tool. It's memory. It's my dad's." Zaylor tilted his head, confused. "Your father's. Was he a warrior?" Mason chuckled, shaking his head. "Not the way you mean. He was a mechanic. Spent his whole life fixing broken machines, broken cars, broken generators. If it was busted, he'd fix it. I used to watch him when I was a kid, big rough hands covered in grease, but always gentle when he worked. He used to tell me, 'Son, anyone can break something. Takes real strength to make it work again.'" Mason's voice grew quieter, his eyes distant, as though seeing something far away. "When he passed away, this was the only thing I kept, his wrench. He held it every day of his life. When I hold it, it feels like he's still with me. Reminds me why I do what I do." Zaylor's black eyes widened. A tool, carried for memory, for strength, for connection. Among the Virkan, weapons were passed down through generations, carrying honor from one soldier to the next. But never had Zaylor heard of a tool being treated with the same reverence. Still, Mason wasn't finished. He tapped the wrench against the table, his expression hardening. "And besides, it's not just about memory. You see, battles aren't just won by shooting. They're won by keeping things running. Guns jam, shields fail, engines burn out. Out there, in the middle of a fight. Sometimes the difference between living and dying isn't who fires faster, who fixes faster. This tool has saved more lives than I could count. Maybe not directly, but without it, nothing else works." Zaylor felt his chest tighten. The words struck deep, though he could not explain why. To him, war was destruction, measured in fire and loss. But this human, he spoke of war in terms of survival, repair, renewal. Still, the Virkan soldier pressed further. "And so, you sleep with it. Even in rest, you cannot release it." Mason's grin softened into something almost sad. "Yeah, guess so. Out there in the dark, I need the reminder. Reminds me that my job isn't just to fight, it's to fix. To keep things together when everything else is falling apart. He picked up the wrench again, holding it gently, almost like one would hold a child. Then he slid it back into his bag. His eyes met Zyler's, sharp and unflinching. You Virkin carry weapons because you're ready to fight. I carry this because I'm ready to fix. That's what humans do. We fix what's broken, even when it hurts. Zyler said nothing for a long time, his mind whirled, trying to fit this strange human philosophy into the neat boxes of Virkin logic. But no matter how he turned it, the truth was clear. Humans were not like any race he had known. They did not divide war and peace, destruction and creation. To them, it was all one struggle, and for the first time Zyler wondered if perhaps the Alliance needed the humans for more than just their bravery. Perhaps they needed them for their hope. The days passed, but Zyler could not stop thinking about the humans' words. We fix what's broken, even when it hurts. The sentence replayed in his mind like an echo he could not silence. In the Virkin tradition, strength was shown by how much one could destroy. A Virkin warrior was honored for the number of battles he fought, the enemies he cut down, the scars he carried. Tools had their place, yes, but far behind the warriors. Yet here was a species that seemed to blur the line between soldier and builder, fighter and healer. One evening, Zyler found himself standing in the hangar, watching Mason again. The human was crouched under the wing of a shuttle, his hands dark with grease. The same old wrench glinted as it turned, sparks flying from a stubborn bolt. Mason's face was set in concentration, but there was something else there too. A softness, a care. He worked, not like someone simply repairing a machine, but like someone protecting a life. Zyler finally asked, "Why do you always repair things yourself? There are engineers assigned for that work." Mason paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because I can't stand waiting for someone else to fix it. If something's broken, I've got to put my hands on it. My dad used to say, don't walk past a broken thing and think it'll fix itself. If you see it, it's your job to make it better." He smiled faintly as he tightened another bolt. "When I was a kid, I'd sit in the garage for hours, watching him work. Sometimes he'd hand me this wrench and let me help. I wasn't strong enough to loosen bolts back then, but he never cared. He'd let me hold the light, or pass tools, or just sit there and talk. To him, it didn't matter if it took twice as long. What mattered was teaching me that nothing in this world was too broken to try fixing." Zyler tilted his head. Among the Virkin, a father prepared his child by teaching combat, showing how to strike, how to endure pain. The human father had done the opposite, teaching repair instead of ruin. It unsettled Zyler, but at the same time, it stirred something. Mason leaned back, tapping the wrench lightly against his leg. His voice lowered, his eyes distant again. The day he died, he was working. Heart gave out right there in the garage, next to the engine he was fixing. The wrench rolled from his hand. When I picked it up, I swore I'd never let it go. Feels like a piece of him stayed inside it. No, every time I hold it, it's like he's still guiding me, still telling me, keep fixing, don't stop. The words hung heavy in the air. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Zyler felt something press against his chest, an ache he could not name. The wrench was not simply a tool, it was a memory carved into metal, a father's love carried across years, across stars. Finally, Mason broke the silence with a laugh, though his eyes glistened faintly. "Guess it sounds kinda stupid to you, huh? Sleeping with a tool, carrying it everywhere. People back on Earth teased me for it too, but I don't care. It's all I've got left of him. And out here, in the middle of nowhere, it reminds me why I fight. Not for medals, not for orders, but for the people who need someone to keep things running. For the ones who can't fix things themselves." Zyler said nothing. He only watched as Mason returned to his work, the wrench moving in, steady rhythm, like an extension of his hand. Later, as Zaylor walked back through the ship's long halls, he realized something had changed inside him. He thought of his own father, who had pressed a blade into his hands when he was young, saying, "This is who you are, a warrior, a destroyer of enemies." He had never questioned it, until now. What if strength was not only the power to destroy, but also the courage to mend? What if the true warrior was not the one who shattered, but the one who refused to let anything stay broken? That night, Zaylor lay awake in his bunk, his mind unsettled. He could almost see the human's hands, scarred and rough, gripping that old piece of metal as if it were more precious than life. For the first time in his life, Zaylor felt envy not of a weapon, not of a victory, but of a memory carried inside a simple wrench. He whispered into the quiet of his room, "Perhaps humans are not reckless. Perhaps they are simply unwilling to let go." The words felt heavy, and yet strangely comforting. He did not know it then, but that single thought would shape everything that followed. The alarm shattered the calm of the ship. Zaylor woke to the deep, rumbling roar of klaxons, the flashing red lights painting every wall like fire. The announcement blared through the corridors in a sharp, cold voice. "Keth raiders inbound. All hands to battle stations." Zaylor leaped from his bunk, heart pounding. His people had fought the Keth for generations. They were merciless, tearing through ships like wolves through wounded prey. To meet them in battle meant blood. To lose meant silence. He sprinted down the hall, soldiers rushing past him, weapons in their hands, eyes sharp with fear and fury. But as he passed the engineering deck, he slowed. A voice carried over the alarm slout, commanding, familiar, "Move, move, seal that line. Get that pump running again. You, check the power coupling." Zaylor turned and saw him. Mason. The human stood in the middle of chaos, uniform half-sipped, grease already smeared across his arms. His wrench swung in his hand, not as a weapon, but as a commander's baton, pointing, guiding, demanding. Around him engineers scrambled to obey, pulling wires, slamming tools against panels, sealing sparks before they became fires. The ship shook violently as enemy plasma struck the hull. The floor trembled beneath their feet. A spray of sparks burst from a broken conduit, showering the deck in glowing shards. One of the Virkin engineers ducked away, but Mason charged forward, slamming his wrench against the valve, twisting with all his strength. The sparks burned his sleeves, but he didn't let go. "Don't stand there, get the foam. Shut it down before it spreads." Mason barked, and they moved as if his voice carried more authority than the alarms. Zaylor stood, frozen in the doorway. Soldiers like him were trained to fight enemies face to face. But here was another battlefield. No rifles, no blades, only sparks, smoke, and failing systems. And Mason fought it with nothing but his hands and that old piece of metal. Another explosion ripped through the corridor outside, throwing Zaylor against the wall. He stumbled back into the room just as the lights flickered and died. For a moment, there was only darkness, broken by the glow of fire. "We've lost the secondary grid," one of the engineers shouted. Mason's voice cut through the panic, like steel. "Then reroute through the tertiary. I'll stabilize the coolant flow." Zaylor couldn't stop staring. This was not recklessness. This was not chaos. This was a human standing inside the storm, refusing to move, refusing to break. His body bent with effort, muscles straining, his jaw locked in determination. Every move said one thing: this ship will not die today. Zaylor finally spoke, shouting over the roar. "You should be at a weapon station, human. Leave this to the engineers." Mason shot him a quick glance, eyes blazing with fire. "And who's gonna keep the weapons running if the core burns out? You want guns to shoot? You want shields to hold? Then this comes first." The ship groaned again, metal screaming under enemy fire. Another alarm wailed, shrill and urgent. The coolant pressure was spiking. Sailor recognized the numbers flashing on the screen. If it climbed higher, the reactor would rupture. The whole ship would be nothing but dust in space. The engineers froze. Protocol demanded retreat at that level. No one was trained to handle it directly. No one, except Mason. The human lunged at the valve, wrench biting into the metal wheel. His arms strained, veins standing out in his skin as he forced it to turn. Heat radiated from the pipes, blistering his hands, but still, he pulled. The wheel groaned, resisted, but Mason roared through his teeth and kept twisting. "Come on, stay with me," he shouted, as though the ship itself could hear him. The others only watched, helpless. Even Sailor felt paralyzed. He had faced enemies with blades and fire, but this was a different kind of battle. One human against the rising fury of a machine ready to explode. At last, with a shriek of metal, the valve gave way. The pressure dropped. The alarms silenced, one by one, until only the sound of Mason's ragged breathing filled the room. He collapsed to his knees, the wrench clattering against the floor before he snatched it back into his grip. His hands were red and raw, skin blistered, but he held that piece of metal as if it had been worth every wound. Sailor stared in silence, chest tight, breath caught. He had seen warriors bleed on battlefields before, but he had never seen one bleed for a ship. 4 systems, 4. Something that could not even thank him. Mason looked up, sweat dripping down his face, and forced a grin. "Told you, it's not just a tool, it's how we win." Sailor could only whisper, almost afraid of his own words. "You fight the fire, as if it were the enemy." Mason laughed weakly, leaning against the wall. "Fire, enemy, broken in all the same. You don't run, you fix it. That's the job." And for the first time Sailor understood that humans did not carry tools because they were weak. They carried them because when everything else fell apart, they were the ones who refused to let it stay broken. The ship did not rest. Even after the fire was contained and the alarms dimmed, the battle raged outside. The Keth raiders circled like vultures, pounding the hull with plasma fire. Every impact sent tremors down the corridors, shaking walls, loosening panels, rattling nerves. Sailor remained in the engineering deck, unable to leave. His post as a soldier called him to the weapons bay, but something stronger routed him here. Something told him the true battle was not with rifles, but with the human kneeling in front of a trembling reactor core. The coolant line still hissed angrily, and the heat in the room had risen to suffocating levels. Engineers scrambled, their voices sharp with panic. Pressure climbing again. "The regulator's failing. We can't stop it, it's too unstable." Sailor turned sharply toward the readouts. The numbers climbed higher and higher, red lights flashing in warning. He had seen it once before, long ago, when a Virkan cruiser overloaded in battle. The explosion had torn 3 ships apart in an instant. He knew what would come next if the core ruptured. The engineers began retreating. It was protocol. When the pressure passed the critical line, survival came first. Save who you could, abandon the doomed. That was the way of war. But Mason did not move. The human's jaw clenched as he grabbed. His wrench eyes locked on the massive valve that controlled the core's flow. His face was pale from exhaustion, but his body shook with determination. Sailor stepped forward. "Human, it is too late. Protocol demands retreat. We cannot stop it." Mason's voice was rough but sharp as steel. "Protocol won't save this ship. Somebody has to hold it together." He jammed the wrench onto the valve wheel. Metal screeched as he forced it to turn. The heat poured over him in waves, like opening the mouth of a furnace. His skin flushed, blistering almost instantly. The smell of scorched fabric filled the air, but he didn't let go. The engineers stared in shock. One shouted, "You'll kill yourself." Mason only roared back, teeth gritted. "Better me than all of us." The wrench slipped, biting into his palm. Blood smeared across the handle, but he twisted harder, muscles straining with every ounce of strength. His breath came in ragged gasps. His arms shook violently, but the valve inched forward, grinding against rust and pressure. Zaylor's heart pounded. His people were taught to admire strength on the battlefield, but this was something else. This was a human holding the weight of death itself and refusing to let it fall. He rushed forward, instinct pulling him beside Mason. "I will help." "No," Mason barked, never looking away from the valve. Too much pressure. One pair of hands. One point of control. If this fails, at least it's just me. Zaylor froze. His throat tightened. Words caught like stones. This human was choosing to stand alone, to carry the burden of every soul on the ship. Not because he was ordered, not because of honor, but because he refused to let others pay the price. The pressure alarms screamed louder, the red lights flashing like angry eyes. Mason's arms trembled violently, but his voice came out in a hoarse whisper, almost like a prayer. "Come on, stay with me. Just a little more." The wheel groaned, then suddenly shifted. The pressure gauge dipped, slowly at first, then steadily down. The screaming alarms fell silent, one by one, replaced by the deep, steady hum of a stabilizing reactor. The ship was safe. Mason collapsed forward, wrench still clutched in his burned hand. His body shook as he gasped for air, sweat and blood dripping down his arms. Even unconsciousness threatened to drag him under, but still, his grip never loosened. Zaylor caught him before he hit the floor. The human was heavy, his body radiating heat like a furnace. Blisters had risen on his skin, and the smell of burned flesh stung Zaylor's nose. Yet Mason's face, twisted in pain, also held a faint, weary smile. The engineers stood frozen, silent, eyes wide with awe. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hiss of cooling metal and Mason's ragged breathing. Zaylor finally looked down at the wrench, slick with blood but shining in the dim light. It was no longer just a tool. It was a weapon against despair, a shield against destruction, a bridge between survival and death. He whispered softly, almost reverently, "You did not just fix a machine. You saved us all?" The human stirred faintly, eyes half opening. His voice cracked, barely audible, yet filled with stubborn fire. "Didn't save you. Saved the ship. She still needs fixing." Then his head fell back, unconscious at last, but his fingers stayed locked around the wrench as though nothing in the universe could tear it from him. Zaylor held him close, trembling in silence. He had seen warriors bleed in battle, but never like this. Never for everyone else. Never for hope. And in that moment, Zaylor understood. Humans did not fight only to win. They fought so others could live to see another dawn. The ship was quiet again. Too quiet. The battle outside had ended hours ago. The Keth raiders retreated into the black void, their ships vanishing like shadows fleeing the light. But the corridors of the Virkan vessel did not celebrate. They did not ring with victory songs or cheers. Instead, they were filled with the soft echoes of tired footsteps, the hiss of cooling vents, and the heavy silence of men and women who had come close to death. Zaylor sat in the med bay, his large hands folded tightly together. His black eyes did not leave the human lying on the narrow bed. Mason looked smaller without his fire, without his voice shouting commands above the roar of chaos. His skin was pale, marked with burns wrapped in clean white bandages. Tubes and machines surrounded him, each one humming softly, keeping the rhythm of life steady. But even here, in the stillness, Mason's hand still clutched the wrench. The medics had tried to pry it away to clean his injuries, but his grip was iron. It was as though even unconscious, even half-broken, he would not release the thing that defined him. In the end, they wrapped his hand with the wrench still inside. It as if it had grown to be part of his body. Zaylor leaned forward, his throat tight. He had fought alongside Virkan warriors for decades, seen them die with swords in their hands, faces lit with grim pride. But none of those deaths had struck him the way this living man did. Mason had not bled for honor. He had not risked his life for victory. He had done it for the ship, for the crew, for strangers who might never even know his name. And that unsettled Zaylor more than any enemy blade. He whispered softly, more to himself than to anyone else. Why? Why would you throw yourself into the fire, knowing it would break you? The medbay was silent, save for the steady beeping of the monitors. Yet in his heart, Zaylor already knew the answer. Because Mason could not do otherwise. Because the human spirit did not ask if something was too hard, too dangerous, too painful. It only asked one question. Can it be fixed? Zaylor closed his eyes and thought of his own people. The Virkin taught their children to fight, to endure, to win. They celebrated scars as proof of survival, medals as proof of strength. But what did they fix? What did they protect? How many times had they abandoned a burning ship because protocol demanded retreat? How many lives had they left behind because the rules said survival mattered more than sacrifice? A weight pressed heavy in his chest. He had always believed the Virkin were the stronger race, the wiser warriors. But sitting here, watching a broken human breathe in the silence, Zaylor felt the bitter taste of doubt. The door slid open quietly, and one of the ship's engineers stepped inside. She glanced at Mason, then at Zaylor, and shook her head in wonder. I don't understand them, she whispered. He should be dead. No one should have been able to hold that valve under that pressure. He shouldn't have even tried. Zaylor's voice was low, almost trembling. He tried because no one else would. He stood where we all ran. That is what humans do. The engineer said nothing more. She only bowed her head and left, leaving Zaylor alone again with the silence and the man who had refused to let their ship die. Hours passed. Zaylor did not move. He studied the rise and fall of Mason's chest, the stubborn hand gripping the wrench, the faint smile that seemed carved into his face even in sleep. And slowly, something stirred in Zaylor's heart, something he had not felt in years. It was not fear, not confusion, but respect. A respect deeper than tradition, deeper than orders, deeper than even honor. Because he realized now, humans did not just fight with weapons. They fought with will. They fought with love. They fought with memory. And in their hands, even a simple tool could become something greater than a blade. Zaylor reached forward, carefully placing one clawed hand over Mason's bandaged wrist. He did not squeeze, did not disturb. He only rested it there, a silent gesture of solidarity. You carry hope, Zaylor whispered, hope that refuses to die. Perhaps that is the greatest weapon of all. The monitors beeped steadily, Mason's breathing slow and even. The silence of the room felt less heavy now, less suffocating. For the first time since the battle began, Zaylor felt as though the ship itself was breathing easier, and deep inside, the Virkin soldier knew something had changed, not just for him, not just for Mason, but for the whole alliance. The galaxy had feared human recklessness. They had mocked human chaos, but they had never understood the truth. Humans were the ones who refused to let things stay broken, even when it cost them everything. The medbay lights were dim when Mason finally stirred. Zaylor had stayed at his side for 2 full cycles. He had barely eaten, barely rested. Each time the human's chest rose and fell, Zaylor felt relief. Each time the monitors beeped, steady and strong, he felt hope. Still, doubt gnawed at him. He had seen warriors survive battles only to fade in silence afterward. But then Mason groaned, shifting slightly, his eyelids fluttering open. His voice was rough, weak, but alive. Xal, or the. Virkin leaned forward quickly, his black eyes wide. You are awake. Mason blinked, confusion swimming in his tired gaze. He tried to sit up, but pain forced him back down. His bandaged arms trembled. Yet even in weakness, His right hand tightened around the wrench, still held against his chest. A faint grin tugged at his lips. Guess I didn't drop it, huh? Zaylor's throat tightened. He shook his head slowly. No. Even in unconsciousness, you refused to let it go. For a moment, the two sat in silence, the hum of the medbay surrounding them. Then Mason sighed softly. Ship still in one piece. Yes, Zaylor answered. Because of you. The reactor stabilized. The raiders fled. We are alive. The human let out a weak laugh. Good. That's what matters. Zaylor studied him carefully, his mind heavy with words he had never spoken before. His people had always taught him that warriors earned respect by victory, by killing enemies, by standing unbroken in battle. But Mason had shattered every rule he thought was truth. This human had chosen pain, chosen fire, chosen for glory, not for orders, but simply to keep others alive. Slowly, Zaylor lowered his head. His forehead touched the side of Mason's bed in the Virkan gesture of highest honor. When he spoke, his voice trembled with emotion. I once thought only weapons deserved reverence. I once thought strength was measured only in destruction. But you have shown me another path. You held a tool as if it were a sword. You stood alone where none of us dared. You carried hope in your hands and refused to let it fall. For this, I give you my respect, greater than I have ever given to any warrior of my people. Mason blinked, his tired smile softening. For once, the human did not joke, did not hide behind humor. His voice was quiet, steady. It's not about respect, Zaylor. It's about doing what has to be done. My dad always said if you see something broken, you fix it. Doesn't matter if it's a machine, a ship, or a person. You don't walk away. You don't leave it behind. You fix it. His eyes closed briefly, a tear slipping free before he whispered, That's all I ever wanted to do. Zaylor felt his chest ache. He thought of the many times the Virkan had abandoned broken ships, broken warriors, broken chances, because protocol demanded retreat. And now, sitting here, he realized why humans frightened the galaxy so deeply. It was not their recklessness. It was not their chaos. It was this unshakable refusal to let go, to surrender, to accept that something was beyond repair. You are dangerous, Zaylor whispered, his voice filled with awe, not because you destroy, but because you mend. Mason chuckled faintly, his breath shallow, but steady. He raised the wrench a little, the movement weak but proud. Nah, I just fix what needs fixing. But Zaylor knew better. He rose to his feet, turning toward the window where the stars stretched endlessly outside. He thought of the Alliance, of the long war, of the broken worlds, and scarred soldiers who had given everything to survive. And he thought of the humans newcomers, fragile in body but unyielding in spirit. The galaxy had laughed at them, mocked their clumsy ways, feared their unpredictability. But soon, the galaxy would understand. Because humans were more than fighters. They were repairers, restorers. The ones who refused to let the universe itself fall apart. Zaylor turned back to Mason, his voice steady, almost reverent. You are not a warrior with a weapon. You are something greater. You are the hand that binds the broken. You are the proof that even in fire and chaos, hope can survive. Mason's eyes closed. Again, sleep pulling him back under. But before he drifted away, his lips curved into that familiar, stubborn smile, and Zaylor, watching him, whispered the words he would carry for the rest of his life. This is why the galaxy will never forget the humans. Because when all else breaks, they are the ones who fix it. The silence that followed was not heavy this time. It was gentle. It was peace.